Novel 9. Gillette of Narbonne cures the King of France of a fistula, craves for spouse Bertrand de Roussillon, who marries her against his will, and hies him in despite to Florence, where, as he courts a young woman, Gillette lies with him in her stead, and has 2 sons by him, for which cause he afterwards takes her into favor and entreats her as his wife. Lauretta's story being ended, and the queen being minded not to break her engagement with Dioneo, 'twas now her turn to speak. Wherefore, without awaiting the call of her subjects, thus with mien most gracious she began, now that we have heard Lauretta's story, who shall tell any to compare with it for beauty? Lucky indeed was it that she was not the first, for few that followed would have pleased, and so, I misdoubt me, 'twill fare ill with those that remain to complete the day's narration. However, for what it may be worth, I will tell you a story which seems to me germane to our theme. Know then that in the realm of France there was a gentleman, Isnard, Comte de Roussillon, by name, who, being in ill health, kept ever in attendance on him a physician, one Master Gerard of Narbonne. The said count had an only son named Bertrand, a very fine and winsome little lad, with whom were brought up other children of his own age, among them the said physician's little daughter Gillette, who with a love boundless and ardent out of all keeping with her tender years became enamored of this Bertrand. And so, when the count died, and his son, being left a ward of the king, must needs go to Paris, the girl remained beside herself with grief, and, her father dying soon after, would gladly have gone to Paris to see Bertrand, might she but have found a fair excuse. But no decent pretext could she come by, being left a great and sole heiress and very closely guarded. So being come of marriageable age, still cherishing Bertrand's memory, she rejected not a few suitors, to whom her kinsfolk would fain have married her, without assigning any reason. Now her passion waxing ever more ardent for Bertrand, as she learned that he was grown a most goodly gallant, tidings reached her that the King of France, in consequence of a tumor which he had had in the breast, and which had been ill tended, was now troubled with a fistula, which occasioned him extreme distress and suffering. Nor had he as yet come by a physician that was able, though many had essayed, to cure him, but had rather grown worse under their hands. Wherefore, in despair, he was minded no more to have recourse to any for counsel or aid. Whereat the damsel was overjoyed, deeming not only that she might find therein lawful occasion to go to Paris, but that, if the disease was what she took it to be, it might well betide that she should be wedded to Bertrand. So for not a little knowledge had she gotten from her father she prepared a powder from certain herbs serviceable in the treatment of the supposed disease, and straightway took horse, and hied her to Paris. Arrived there, she made it her first concern to have sight of Bertrand, and then, having obtained access to the king, she besought him of his grace to show her his disease. The king knew not how to refuse so young, fair, and winsome a damsel, and let her see the place. Whereupon, no longer doubting that she should cure him, she said, "Sire, so please you, I hope in God to cure you of this malady within 8 days without causing you the least distress or discomfort." The king inly scoffed at her words, saying to himself, "How should a damsel have come by a knowledge and skill that the greatest physicians in the world do not possess?" He therefore graciously acknowledged her good intention, and answered that he had resolved no more to follow advice of physician. "Sire," said the damsel, "you disdain my art because I am young and a woman, but I bid you bear in mind that I rely not on my own skill, but on the help of God, and the skill of Master Gerard of Narbonne, my father, and a famous physician in his day." Whereupon the king said to himself, "Perchance she is sent me by God, why put I not her skill to the proof, seeing that she says that she can cure me in a short time and cause me no distress?" And being minded to make the experiment, he said, "Damsel, and if, having caused me to cancel my resolve, you should fail to cure me, what are you content should ensue?" "Sire," answered the damsel, "set a guard upon me, and if within 8 days I cure you not, have me burned, but if I cure you, what shall be my guerdon?" "You seem," said the king, "to be yet unmarried. If you shall effect the cure, we will marry you well and in high place." "Sire," returned the damsel, "well content indeed am I that you should marry me, so it be to such a husband as I shall ask of you, save that I may not ask any of your sons or any other member of the royal house." Whereto the king forthwith consented, and the damsel, thereupon applying her treatment, restored him to health before the period assigned. Wherefore, as soon as the king knew that he was cured, "Damsel," said he, "well have you won your husband." She answered, "In that case, sire, I have one Bertrand de Roussillon, of whom, while yet a child, I was enamored, and whom I have ever since most ardently loved." To give her Bertrand seemed to the king no small matter, but having pledged his word, he would not break it. So he sent for Bertrand and said to him, "Bertrand, you are now come to man's estate and fully equipped to enter on it. 'Tis therefore our will that you go back and assume the governance of your county, and that you take with you a damsel, whom we have given you to wife." "And who is the damsel, sire?" said Bertrand. "She it is," answered the king, "that has restored us to health by her physic." Now Bertrand, knowing Gillette, and that her lineage was not such as matched his nobility, albeit, seeing her, he had found her very fair, was overcome with disdain, and answered, "So, sire, you would fain give me a she-doctor to wife. Now God forbid that I should ever marry any such woman. Then," said the king, "you would have us fail of the faith which we pledged to the damsel, who asked you in marriage by way of guerdon for our restoration to health." "Sire," said Bertrand, "you may take from me all that I possess, and give me as your man to whomsoever you may be minded, but rest assured that I shall never be satisfied with such a match." "Nay, but you will," replied the king, "for the damsel is fair and discreet, and loves you well, wherefore we anticipate that you will live far more happily with her than with a dame of much higher lineage." Bertrand was silent, and the king made great preparations for the celebration of the nuptials. The appointed day came, and Bertrand, albeit reluctantly, nevertheless complied, and in the presence of the king was wedded to the damsel, who loved him more dearly than herself. Which done, Bertrand, who had already taken his resolution, said that he was minded to go down to his county, there to consummate the marriage. And so, having craved and had leave of absence of the king, he took horse, but instead of returning to his county, he hied him to Tuscany, where, finding the Florentines at war with the Sienese, he determined to take service with the Florentines, and being made heartily and honorably welcome, was appointed to the command of part of their forces, at a liberal stipend, and so remained in their service for a long while. Distressed by this turn of fortune, and hoping by her wise management to bring Bertrand back to his county, the bride hied her to Roussillon, where she was received by all the tenants as their liege lady. She found that, during the long absence of the lord, everything had fallen into decay and disorder, which, being a capable woman, she rectified with great and sedulous care, to the great joy of the tenants, who held her in great esteem and love, and severely censured the count that he was not satisfied with her. When the lady had duly ordered all things in the county, she dispatched 2 knights to the count with the intelligence, praying him that, if 'twas on her account that he came not home, he would so inform her, in which case she would gratify him by departing. To whom with all harshness he replied, "She may even please herself in the matter. For my part, one will go home and live with her, when she has this ring on her finger and a son gotten of me upon her arm." The ring was one which he greatly prized, and never removed from his finger, by reason of a virtue which he had been given to understand that it possessed. The knights appreciated the harshness of a condition which contained 2 articles, both of which were all but impossible, and, seeing that by no words of theirs could they alter his resolve, they returned to the lady and delivered his message. Sorely distressed, the lady after long pondering determined to try how, and where the 2 conditions might be satisfied, that so her husband might be hers again. Having formed her plan, she assembled certain of the more considerable and notable men of the county, to whom she gave a consecutive and most touching narrative of all that she had done for love of the count, with the result, concluding by saying that she was not minded to tarry there to the count's perpetual exile, but to pass the rest of her days in pilgrimages and pious works for the good of her soul. Wherefore she prayed them to undertake the defense and governance of the county, and to inform the count that she had made entire and absolute cession of it to him, and was gone away with the intention of never more returning to Roussillon. As she spoke, tears not a few coursed down the cheeks of the honest men, and again they besought her to change her mind and stay. All in vain, however. She commended them to God, and, accompanied only by one of her male cousins and a chambermaid, all 3 habited as pilgrims and amply provided with money and precious jewels, she took the road, nor tarried until she was arrived at Florence. There she lodged in a little inn kept by a good woman that was a widow, bearing herself lowly as a poor pilgrim, and eagerly expectant of news of her lord. Now it so befell that the very next day she saw Bertrand pass in front of the inn on horseback at the head of his company, and though she knew him very well, nevertheless she asked the good woman of the inn who he was. The hostess replied, "'Tis a foreign gentleman, Count Bertrand. They call him a very pleasant gentleman, and courteous and much beloved in this city. And he is in the last degree enamored of one of our neighbors here, who is a gentlewoman, but in poor circumstances. A very virtuous damsel she is too, and being as yet unmarried by reason of her poverty, she lives with her mother, who is an excellent and most discreet lady, but for whom, perchance, she would before now have yielded and gratified the Count's desire." No word of this was lost on the lady. She pondered and meditated every detail with the closest attention, and having laid it all to heart, took her resolution. She ascertained the names and abode of the lady and her daughter that the Count loved, and hied her one day privily, wearing her pilgrim's weeds, to their house, where she found the lady and her daughter in very evident poverty, and after greeting them, told the lady that, if it were agreeable to her, she would speak with her. The gentlewoman rose and signified her willingness to listen to what she had to say, so they went into a room by themselves and sate down, and then the Countess began thus: "Madam, methinks you are, as I am, under fortune's frown, but perchance you have it in your power, if you're so minded, to afford solace to both of us." The lady answered that, so she might honorably find it, solace indeed was what she craved most of all things in the world. Whereupon the Countess continued, "I must first be assured of your faith, wherein if I confide and am deceived, the interests of both of us will suffer." "Have no fear," said the gentlewoman, "speak your whole mind without reserve, for you will find that there is no deceit in me." So the Countess told who she was, and the whole course of her love affair, from its commencement to that hour, on such wise that the gentlewoman, believing her story the more readily that she had already heard it in part from others, was touched with compassion for her. The narrative of her woes complete, the Countess added, "Now that you have heard my misfortunes, you know the two conditions that I must fulfill if I would come by my husband, nor know I any other person than you that may enable me to fulfill them. But so you may, if this which I hear is true, to wit, that my husband is in the last degree enamored of your daughter." "Madam," replied the gentlewoman, "I know not if the Count loves my daughter, but true it is that he makes great show of loving her. But how may this enable me to do aught for you in the matter that you have at heart?" "The how, madam," returned the Countess, "I will shortly explain to you, but you shall first hear what I intend shall ensue if you serve me. Your daughter, I see, is fair and of marriageable age, and, by what I have learned and may well understand, 'tis because you have not the wherewith to marry her that you keep her at home. Now, in recompense of the service that you shall do me, I mean to provide her forthwith from my own moneys with such a dowry as you yourself shall deem adequate for her marriage." The lady was too needy not to be gratified by the proposal, but nevertheless, with the true spirit of the gentlewoman, she answered, "Nay, but madam, tell me that which I may do for you, and if it shall be such as I may honorably do, gladly will I do it, and then you shall do as you may be minded." Said then the Countess, "I require of you, that through some one in whom you trust you send word to the Count, my husband, that your daughter is ready to yield herself entirely to his will, so she may be sure that he loves her even as he professes, whereof she will never be convinced, until he send her the ring which he wears on his finger, and which, she understands, he prizes so much. Which, being sent, you shall give to me, and shall then send him word that your daughter is ready to do his pleasure, and, having brought him hither secretly, you shall contrive that I lie by his side instead of your daughter. Perchance, by God's grace I shall conceive, and so, having his ring on my finger and a son gotten of him on my arm, shall have him for my own again, and live with him even as a wife should live with her husband, and owe it all to you." The lady felt that 'twas not a little that the Countess craved of her, for she feared lest it should bring reproach upon her daughter. But she reflected that to aid the good lady to recover her husband was an honorable enterprise, and that in undertaking it she would be subserving a like end. And so, trusting in the good and virtuous disposition of the Countess, she not only promised to do as she was required, but in no long time, proceeding with caution and secrecy, as she had been bidden, she both had the ring from the Count, loath though he was to part with it, and cunningly contrived that the countess should lie with him in place of her daughter. In which first commingling, so ardently sought by the count, it so pleased God that the lady was gotten, as in due time her delivery made manifest with 2 sons. Nor once only, but many times did the lady gratify the countess with the embraces of her husband, using such secrecy that no word thereof ever got wind. The count all the while supposing that he lay, not with his wife, but with her that he loved, and being wont to give her, as he left her in the morning, some fair and rare jewel, which she jealously guarded. When she perceived that she was with child, the countess, being minded no more to burden the lady with such service, said to her, "Madam, thanks be to God and to you, I now have that which I desired, and therefore 'tis time that I make you grateful requital, and take my leave of you." The lady answered that she was glad if the countess had got naught that gave her joy, but that 'twas not as hoping to have guerdon thereof that she had done her part, but simply because she deemed it meet and her duty so to do. "Well said, madam," returned the countess, "and in like manner that which you shall ask of me I shall not give you by way of guerdon, but because I deem it meet and my duty to give it." Whereupon the lady, yielding to necessity, and abashed beyond measure, asked of her 100 pounds wherewith to marry her daughter. The countess, marking her embarrassment, and the modesty of her request, gave her 500 pounds besides jewels fair and rare, worth perhaps no less. And having thus much more than contented her, and received her superabundant thanks, she took leave of her and returned to the inn. The lady, to render purposeless further visits or messages on Bertrand's part, withdrew with her daughter to the house of her kinsfolk in the country. Nor was it long before Bertrand, on the urgent entreaty of his vassals and intelligence of the departure of his wife, quitted Florence and returned home. Greatly elated by this intelligence, the countess tarried a while in Florence, and was there delivered of 2 sons as like as possible to their father, whom she nurtured with sedulous care. But by and by she saw fit to take the road, and being come, unrecognized by any, to Montpellier, rested there a few days. And being on the alert for news of the count and where he was, she learned that on All Saints' Day he was to hold a great reception of ladies and gentlemen at Roussillon. Whither, retaining her now wanted pilgrim's weeds, she hied her, and finding that the ladies and gentlemen were all gathered in the count's palace, and on the point of going to table, she tarried not to change her dress, but went up into the hall, bearing her little ones in her arms, and threading her way through the throng to the place where she saw the count stand, she threw herself at his feet, and sobbing, said to him, "My lord, thy hapless bride am I, who to ensure thy homecoming and abidance in peace have long time been a wanderer, and now demand of the observance of the condition, whereof word was brought me by the 2 knights whom I sent to thee. Lo, in my arms not 1 son only but 2, got of thee, and on my finger thy ring. 'Tis time then that I be received of thee as thy wife according to thy word." Whereat the count was all dumbfounded, recognizing the ring and his own lineaments in the children, so like were they to him, but saying to himself nevertheless, "How can it have come about?" So the countess, while the count and all that were present marveled exceedingly, told what had happened, and the manner of it in precise detail. Wherefore the count, perceiving that she spoke truth, and having regard to her perseverance and address and her 2 fine boys, and the wishes of all his vassals and the ladies, who with one accord besought him to own and honor her thenceforth as his lawful bride, laid aside his harsh obduracy, and raised the countess to her feet, and embraced and kissed her, and acknowledged her for his lawful wife, and the children for his own. Then, having caused her to be rearrayed in garments befitting her rank, he, to the boundless delight of as many as were there, and of all other his vassals, gave up that day, and some that followed to feasting and merrymaking, and did ever thenceforth honor, love, and most tenderly cherish her as his bride and wife. Novel 10. A Libetch turns hermit, and is taught by Rustico, a monk, how the devil is put in hell. She is afterwards conveyed thence, and becomes the wife of Nearbil. Dioneo, observing that the queen's story, which he had followed with the closest attention, was now ended, and that it only remained for him to speak, waited not to be bidden, but smilingly thus began. "Gracious ladies, perchance you have not yet heard how the devil is put in hell. Wherefore, without deviating far from the topic of which you have discoursed throughout the day, I will tell you how 'tis done. It may be the lesson will prove inspiring. Besides which you may learn therefrom that, albeit love prefers the gay palace and the dainty chamber to the rude cabin. Yet, for all that, he may at times manifest his might in wilds matted with forests, rugged with Alps, and desolate with caverns. Whereby it may be understood that all things are subject to his sway. But to come to my story, I say that in the city of Capsa, one in Barbary, there was once a very rich man, who with other children had a fair and dainty little daughter, Alibech by name. Now Alibech, not being a Christian, and hearing many Christians that were in the city speak much in praise of the Christian faith and the service of God, did one day inquire of one of them after what fashion it were possible to serve God with as few impediments as might be, and was informed that they served God best who most completely renounced the world and its affairs, like those who had fixed their abode in the wilds of the Thebaid desert. Whereupon, actuated by no sober predilection, but by childish impulse, the girl, who was very simple and about 14 years of age, said never a word more of the matter, but stole away on the morrow, and quite alone set out to walk to the Thebaid desert. And by force of resolution, albeit with no small suffering, she after some days reached those wilds. Where, espying a cabin a great way off, she hied her thither, and found a holy man by the door, who, marveling to see her there, asked her what she came there to seek. She answered that, guided by the Spirit of God, she was come thither, seeking, if haply she might serve him, and also find some one that might teach her how he ought to be served. Marking her youth and great beauty, the worthy man, fearing lest, if he suffered her to remain with him, he should be ensnared by the devil, commended her good intention, set before her a frugal repast of roots of herbs, crab-apples, and dates, with a little water to wash them down, and said to her, "My daughter, there is a holy man not far from here, who is much better able to teach thee that of which thou art in quest than I am. Go to him, therefore." And he showed her the way. But when she was come whither she was directed, she met with the same answer as before. And so, setting forth again, she came at length to the cell of a young hermit, a worthy man and very devout, his name Rustico, whom she interrogated as she had the others. Rustico, being minded to make severe trial of his constancy, did not send her away as the others had done, but kept her with him in his cell, and when night came, made her a little bed of palm leaves, whereon he bade her compose herself to sleep. Hardly had she done so before the solicitations of the flesh joined battle with the powers of Rustico's spirit, and he, finding himself left in the lurch by the latter, endured not many assaults before he beat a retreat and surrendered at discretion. Wherefore he bade adieu to holy meditation and prayer and discipline, and fell a musing on the youth and beauty of his companion, and also how he might so order his conversation with her, that without seeming to her to be a libertine, he might yet compass that which he craved of her. So, probing her by certain questions, he discovered that she was as yet entirely without cognizance of man, and as simple as she seemed. Wherefore he excogitated a plan for bringing her to pleasure him under color of serving God. He began by giving her a long lecture on the great enmity that subsists between God and the devil. After which, he gave her to understand that, God having condemned the devil to hell, to put him there was of all services the most acceptable to God. The girl asking him how it might be done, Rustico answered, "Thou shalt know it in a trice, thou hast but to do that which thou seest me do." Then, having divested himself of his scanty clothing, he threw himself stark naked on his knees, as if he would pray, whereby he caused the girl, who followed his example, to confront him in the same posture. Whereupon Rustico, seeing her so fair, felt an accession of desire, and therewith came an insurgence of the flesh, which Alibech, marking with surprise, said, "Rustico, what is this, which I see thee have, that so protrudes, and which I have not?" "Oh, my daughter," said Rustico, "'tis the devil of whom I have told thee, and cease thou. He is now tormenting me most grievously, insomuch that I am scarce able to hold out." Then, "Praise be to God," said the girl, "I see that I am in better case than thou, for no such devil have I." "Sooth sayst thou," returned Rustico, "but instead of him thou hast somewhat else that I have not." "Oh," said Alibech, "what may that be?" "Hell," answered Rustico, "and I tell thee that 'tis my belief that God has sent thee hither for the salvation of my soul. Seeing that, if this devil shall continue to plague me thus, then, so thou wilt have compassion on me and permit me to put him in hell, thou wilt both afford me great and exceeding great solace, and render to God an exceeding most acceptable service, if, as thou sayst, thou art come into these parts for such a purpose. In good faith the girl made answer, As I have hell to match your devil, be it, my father, as and when you will. Whereupon, Bless thee, my daughter, said Rustico, go we then, and put him there, that he leave me henceforth in peace. Which said, he took the girl to one of the beds, and taught her the posture in which she must lie in order to incarcerate this spirit accursed of God. The girl, having never before put any devil in hell, felt on this first occasion a twinge of pain, wherefore she said to Rustico, Of a surety, my father, he must be a wicked fellow, this devil, and in very truth a foe to God, for there is sorrow even in hell, not to speak of other places when he is put there. Daughter, said Rustico, 'twill not be always so. And for better assurance, thereof they put him there 6 times before they quitted the bed, whereby they so thoroughly abased his pride, that he was fain to be quiet. However, the proud fit returning upon him from time to time, and the girl addressing herself always obediently to its reduction, it so befell that she began to find the game agreeable, and would say to Rustico, Now see I plainly that 'twas true, what the worthy men said at Capsa, of the service of God being so delightful. Indeed I cannot remember that in aught that ever I did I had so much pleasure, so much solace, as in putting the devil in hell. For which cause I deem it insensate folly on the part of any one to have a care to aught else than the service of God. Wherefore many a time she would come to Rustico, and say to him, My father, 'twas to serve God that I came hither, and not to pass my days in idleness. Go we then, and put the devil in hell. And while they did so, she would now and again say, Know not, Rustico, why the devil should escape from hell. Were he but as ready to stay there as hell is to receive and retain him, he would never come out of it. So, the girl thus frequently inviting and exhorting Rustico to the service of God, there came at length a time when she had so thoroughly lightened his doublet that he shivered when another would have sweated. Wherefore he began to instruct her that the devil was not to be corrected and put in hell, save when his head was exalted with pride, adding, And we by God's grace have brought him to so sober a mind that he prays God he may be left in peace. By which means he for a time kept the girl quiet. But when she saw that Rustico had no more occasion for her to put the devil in hell, she said to him one day, Rustico, if thy devil is chastened, and gives thee no more trouble, my hell, on the other hand, gives me no peace. Wherefore, I with my hell have holpen thee to abase the pride of thy devil, so thou wouldst do well to lend me the aid of thy devil to allay the fervent heat of my hell. Rustico, whose diet was roots of herbs and water, was scarce able to respond to her demands. He told her that 'twould require not a few devils to allay the heat of hell, but that he would do what might be in his power. And so now and again he satisfied her, but so seldom that 'twas as if he had tossed a bean into the jaws of a lion. Whereat the girl, being fain of more of the service of God than she had, did somewhat repine. However, the case standing thus, deficiency of power against superfluity of desire, between Rustico's devil and Alibech's hell, it chanced that a fire broke out in Capsa, whereby the house of Alibech's father was burned, and he and all his sons and the rest of his household perished, so that Alibech was left sole heiress of all his estate. And a young gallant, Nearbill by name, who by reckless munificence had wasted all his substance, having discovered that she was alive, addressed himself to the pursuit of her, and having found her in time to prevent the confiscation of her father's estate as an escheat for failure of heirs, took her, much to Rustico's relief and against her own will, back to Capsa, and made her his wife, and shared with her vast patrimony. But before he had lain with her, she was questioned by the ladies of the manner in which she had served God in the desert, whereto she answered that she had been wont to serve him by putting the devil in hell, and that Nearbill had committed a great sin when he took her out of such service. The ladies being curious to know how the devil was put in hell, the girl satisfied them, partly by words, partly by signs. Whereat they laughed exorbitantly, and still laugh, and said to her, Be not downhearted, daughter. 'Tis done here too, Nearbill will know well how to serve God with you in that way. And so the story passing from mouth to mouth throughout the city, it came at last to be a common proverb, that the most acceptable service that can be rendered to God is to put the devil in hell, which proverb, having traveled hither across the sea, is still current. Wherefore, young ladies, you that have need of the grace of God, see to it that you learn how to put the devil in hell, because 'tis mightily pleasing to God, and of great solace to both the parties, and much good may thereby be engendered and ensue. 1 Now Gafsa in Tunis. 1,000 times or more had Dionio's story brought the laugh to the lips of the honorable ladies. So quaint and curiously entertaining found they the fashion of it. And now at its close the queen, seeing the term of her sovereignty come, took the laurel wreath from her head, and with mien most debonair, set it on the brow of Philostrato, saying, "We shall soon see whether the wolf will know better how to guide the sheep than the sheep have yet succeeded in guiding the wolves." Whereat Philostrato said with a laugh, "Had I been hearkened to, the wolves would have taught the sheep to put the devil in hell, even as Rustico taught a Libech. Wherefore call us not wolves, seeing that you have not shewn yourselves sheep. However, as best I may be able, I will govern the kingdom committed to my charge." Whereupon Nephil took him up. "Hark ye, Philostrato," she said, "while you thought to teach us, you might have learnt a lesson from us, as did Mazzetto de Lamporecchio from the nuns, and have recovered your speech when the bones had learned to whistle without a master." 1 Philostrato, perceiving that there was a scythe for each of his arrows, gave up jesting, and addressed himself to the governance of his kingdom. He called the seneschal, and held him strictly to account in every particular. He then judiciously ordered all matters as he deemed would be best and most to the satisfaction of the company, while his sovereignty should last. And having so done, he turned to the ladies and said, "Loving ladies, as my ill luck would have it, since I have had wit to tell good from evil, the charms of one or other of you have kept me ever a slave to love. And for all I showed myself humble and obedient and conformable, so far as I knew how, to all his ways, my fate has been still the same, to be discarded for another, and go ever from bad to worse. And so, I suppose, 'twill be with me to the hour of my death. Wherefore I am minded that tomorrow our discourse be of no other topic than that which is most germane to my condition, to wit, of those whose loves had a disastrous close, because mine, I expect, will in the long run be most disastrous, nor for other cause was the name, by which you address me, given me by one that well knew its signification." Which said, he arose, and dismissed them all until supper time. So fair and delightsome was the garden that none saw fit to quit it, and seek diversion elsewhere. Rather for the sun now shone with a tempered radiance that caused no discomfort. Some of the ladies gave chase to the kids and canailles and other creatures that haunted it, and, scampering to and fro among them as they sate, had caused them 100 times, or so, some slight embarrassment. Dionio and Fiammetta fell a-singing of Messer Guglielmo and the Lady of Vergio. 2 Philomna and Pamphilo sat them down to a game of chess, and, as thus they pursued each their several diversions, time sped so swiftly that the supper hour stole upon them almost unawares, whereupon they ranged the tables round the beautiful fountain, and supped with all glad and festal cheer. When the tables were removed, Philostrato, being minded to follow in the footsteps of his fair predecessors in sway, bade Loretta lead a dance and sing a song. She answered, "My lord, songs of others know I none, nor does my memory furnish me with any of mine own that seems meet for so gay a company, but if you will be content with what I have, gladly will I give you thereof." "Naught of thine," returned the king, "could be other than goodly and delectable. Wherefore give us even what thou hast." So encouraged, Loretta, with dulcet voice, but manner somewhat languishing, raised the ensuing strain, to which the other ladies responded. "What dame disconsolate may so lament as I, that vainly sigh, to love still dedicate? He that the heaven and every orb doth move formed me for his delight fair, debonair and gracious, apt for love, that here on earth each soaring spirit might have foretaste how, above that beauty shows that standeth in his sight. But dull wit and slight, for that it judge it ill, liketh me not, nay, doth me vilely rate. There was who loved me, and my maiden grace did fondly clip and strain, as in his arms, so in his soul's embrace, and from mine eyes love's fire did drink amain. And time that glides apace in naught, but courting me to spend was fain whom courteous I did deign even as my peer to entreat, but am of him bereft. Dolorous fate! Came to me next a gallant swan with pride, brave in his own conceit, and no less noble eke. Whom woe betide that he me took, and holds in all unmeet suspicion, jealouside. And I, who wot that me the world should greet as the predestined sweet of many men, well nigh despair, to be to one thus subjugate. Woe is me! Cursed be the luckless day, when, a new gown to wear, I said the fatal I. For blithe and gay in that plain gown I lived, no whit less fair while in this rich array a sad, and far less honored life I bear. Would I had died, or ere sounded those notes of joy, ah! Dolorous cheer, my woe to celebrate. So list my supplication, lover dear, of whom such joyance I as ne'er another had. Thou that in clear light of the Maker's presence art, deny not pity to thy fear, who thee may ne'er forget. But let one sigh breathe tidings that on high thou burnest still for me, and sue of God that he me there translate. So ended Loretta her song, to which all hearkened attentively, though not all interpreted it alike. Some were inclined to give it a moral after the Milanese fashion, to wit, that a good porker was better than a pretty queen. Others construed it in a higher, better and truer sense, which 'tis not to the present purpose to unfold. Some more songs followed by command of the king, who caused torches, not a few to be lighted and ranged about the flowery mead. And so the night was prolonged until the last star that had risen had begun to set. Then, bethinking him that 'twas time for slumber, the king bade all good night and dismissed them to their several chambers. 1. I.e. When you were so emaciated that your bones made music like a skeleton in the wind. 2. Evidently some version of the tragical cant de la Chastelaine de Vergi, qui mori pour l'ailment aimer son ami. See Fablios et Contes, ed. Barbezin Roman 4. 296, and cf. Bandello, pt. Roman 4. Nav. V. and Heptameron, Journey Roman 7. Nouvelle LXX. Endeth here the third day of the Decameron, beginneth the fourth, in which under the rule of Philostrato, discourse is had of those whose loves had a disastrous close. Dearest ladies, as well from what I heard in converse with the wise, as from matters that not seldom fell within my own observation and reading, I formed the opinion that the vehement and scorching blast of envy was apt to vent itself only upon lofty towers or the highest tree-tops. But therein I find that I misjudged. For, whereas I ever sought and studied how best to elude the buffetings of that furious hurricane, and to that end kept a course not merely on the plain, but, by preference, in the depth of the valley, as should be abundantly clear to whoso looks at these little stories, written as they are not only in the vulgar Florentine, and in prose, and without dedicatory flourish, but also in as homely and simple a style as may be. Nevertheless, all this has not stood me in such stead, but that I have been shrewdly shaken, nay, all but uprooted by the blast, and altogether lacerated by the bite of this same envy. Whereby I may very well understand that 'tis true, what the sages aver, that only misery is exempt from envy in the present life. Know then, discreet my ladies, that some there are, who, reading these little stories, have alleged that I am too fond of you, and that 'tis not a seemly thing that I should take so much pleasure in ministering to your gratification and solace. And some have found more fault with me for praising you as I do. Others, affecting to deliver a more considered judgment, have said that it ill befits my time of life to ensue such matters, to wit, the discoursing of women, or endeavoring to pleasure them. And not a few, feigning a mighty tender regard to my fame, aver that I should do more wisely to keep ever with the muses on Parnassus, than to forgather with you in such vain dalliance. Those again there are, who, evincing less wisdom than despite, have told me that I should show sounder sense if I bethought me how to get my daily bread, than, going after these idle toys, to nourish myself upon the wind. While certain others, in disparagement of my work, strive might and main to make it appear that the matters which I relate fell out otherwise than as I set them forth. Such then, noble ladies, are the blasts, such the sharp and cruel fangs by which, while I champion your cause, I am assailed, harassed and well-nigh pierced through and through. Which censures I hear and mark, God knows, with equal mind. And, though to you belongs all my defense, yet I mean not to be niggard of my own powers, but rather, without dealing out to them the castigation they deserve, to give them such slight answer as may secure my ears some respite of their clamor, and that without delay. Seeing that, if already, though I have not completed the third part of my work, they are not a few and very presumptuous, I deem it possible that before I have reached the end, should they receive no check, they may have grown so numerous that 'twould scarce tax their powers to sink me. and that your forces, great though they be, would not suffice to withstand them. However, I am minded to answer none of them, until I have related in my behoof, not indeed an entire story. For I would not seem to foist my stories in among those of so honorable a company as that with which I have made you acquainted, but a part of one, that its very incompleteness may show that it is not one of them. Wherefore, addressing my assailants, I say, that in our city there was in old time a citizen named Filippo Balducci, a man of quite low origin, but of good substance and well-versed and expert in matters belonging to his condition, who had a wife that he most dearly loved, as did she him, so that their life passed in peace and concord, nor there was aught they studied so much as how to please each other perfectly. Now it came to pass, as it does to every one, that the good lady departed this life, leaving Filippo naught of hers but an only son that she had had by him, and who was then about 2 years old. His wife's death left Filippo as disconsolate as ever was any man for the loss of a loved one. And sorely missing the companionship that was most dear to him, he resolved to have done with the world, and devote himself and his little son to the service of God. Wherefore, having dedicated all his goods to charitable uses, he forthwith betook him to the summit of Monte Asineo, where he installed himself with his son in a little cell, and living on alms, passed his days in fasting and prayer, being careful above all things to say nothing to the boy of any temporal matters, nor to let him see aught of the kind, lest they should distract his mind from his religious exercises, but discoursing with him continually of the glory of the life eternal, and of God and the saints, and teaching him not else but holy orisons, in which way of life he kept him not a few years, never suffering him to quit the cell or see aught but himself. From time to time, the worthy man would go Florence, where divers of the faithful would afford him relief according to his needs, and so he would return to his cell. And thus it fell out that one day Filippo, now an aged man, being asked by the boy, who was about 18 years old, whither he went, told him. Whereupon, "Father," said the boy, "you are now old and scarce able to support fatigue. Why take you me not with you for once to Florence, and give me to no devout friends of God and you, so that I, who am young and fitter for such exertion than you, may thereafter go to Florence for our supplies at your pleasure, and you remain here." The worthy man, bethinking him that his son was now grown up, and so habituated to the service of God as hardly to be seduced by the things of the world, said to himself, "He says well." And so, as he must needs go to Florence, he took the boy with him, where, seeing the palaces, the houses, the churches, and all matters else with which the city abounds, and of which he had no more recollection than if he had never seen them, the boy found all passing strange, and questioned his father of not a few of them, what they were and how they were named. His curiosity being no sooner satisfied in one particular than he plied his father with a further question. And so it befell that, while son and father were thus occupied in asking and answering questions, they encountered a bevy of damsels, fair and richly arrayed, being on their return from a wedding, whom the young man no sooner saw than he asked his father what they might be. "My son," answered the father, "fix thy gaze on the ground, regard them not at all, for naughty things are they." "Oh," said the son, "and what is their name?" The father, fearing to awaken some mischievous craving of concupiscence in the young man, would not denote them truly, to wit, as women, but said, "They are called goslings." Whereupon, wonderful to tell, the lad, who had never before set eyes on any woman, thought no more of the palaces, the oxen, the horses, the asses, the money, or aught else that he had seen, but exclaimed, "Prithee, father, let me have one of those goslings." "Alas, my son," replied the father, "speak not of them, they are naughty things." "Oh," questioned the son, "but are naughty things made like that?" "Aye," returned the father. Whereupon the son, "I know not," he said, "what you say, nor why they should be naughty things. For my part one have as yet seen naught that seemed to me so fair and delectable. They are fairer than the painted angels that you have so often shewn me. Oh, if you love me, do but let us take one of these goslings up there, and I will see that she have whereon to bill." "Nay," said the father, "that will not I." "Thou knowest not whereon they bill." And straightway, being where that nature was more potent than his art, he repented him that he had brought the boy to Florence. But enough of this story. 'Tis time for me to cut it short and return to those for whose instruction 'tis told. They say then, some of these my censors, that I am too fond of you, young ladies, and am at too great pains to pleasure you. Now that I am fond of you, and am at pains to pleasure you, I do most frankly and fully confess. And I ask them whether, considering only all that it means to have had, and to have continually before one's eyes your debonair demeanor, your bewitching beauty and exquisite grace, and therewithal your modest womanliness, not to speak of having known the amorous kisses, the caressing embraces, the voluptuous comminglings, whereof our intercourse with you, ladies most sweet, not seldom is productive, they do verily marvel that I am fond of you, seeing that one who was nurtured, reared, and brought up on a savage and solitary mountain, within the narrow circuit of a cell, without other companion than his father, had no sooner seen you than 'twas you alone that he desired, that he demanded, that he sought with ardor. Will they tear, will they lacerate me with their censures, if I, whose body heaven fashioned all apt for love, whose soul from very boyhood was dedicate to you, am not insensible to the power of the light of your eyes, to the sweetness of your honeyed words, to the flame that is kindled by your gentle sighs, but am fond of you and sedulous to pleasure you. You, again, I bid them remember, in whom a hermit, a rude, witless lad, liker to an animal than to a human being, found more to delight him than in aught else that he saw. Of a truth, whoso taxes me thus must be one that, feeling, knowing not of the pleasure and power of natural affection, loves you not, nor craves your love, and such an one I hold in light esteem. And as for those that go about to find ground of exception in my age, they do but show that they ill understand that the leek, albeit its head is white, has a green tail. But jesting apart, thus I answer them, that never to the end of my life shall I deem it shameful to me to pleasure those to whom Guido Cavalcanti and Dante Alighieri in their old age, and Messer Sino de Pistia in extreme old age, accounted it an honor, and found it a delight to minister gratification. And but that 'twere a deviation from the use and wont of discourse, I would call history to my aid, and show it to abound with stories of noble men of old time, who in their ripest age studied above all things else to pleasure the ladies, whereof if they be ignorant, go they and get them to school. To keep with the muses on Parnassus is counsel I approve, but tarry with them always we cannot, nor they with us, nor is a man blameworthy, if, when he happen to part from them, he find his delight in those that resemble them. The muses are ladies, and albeit ladies are not the peers of the muses, yet they have their outward semblance, for which cause, if for no other, 'tis reasonable that I should be fond of them. Besides which, ladies have been to me the occasion of composing some 1,000 verses, but of never a verse that I made were the muses the occasion. Howbeit 'twas with their aid, 'twas under their influence that I composed those 1,000 verses, and perchance they have sometimes visited me to encourage me in my present task, humble indeed though it be, doing honor and paying, as it were, tribute to the likeness which the ladies have to them. Wherefore, while I weave these stories, I stray not so far from Mount Parnassus and the muses as not a few perchance suppose. But what shall we say to those, in whom my hunger excites such commiseration that they bid me get me bread? Verily I know not, save this. Suppose that in my need I were to beg bread of them, what would be their answer? I doubt not they would say, go seek it among the fables. And in sooth, the poets have found more bread among their fables than many rich men among their treasures. And many that have gone after fables have crowned their days with splendor, while, on the other hand, not a few, in the endeavor to get them more bread than they needed, have perished miserably. But why waste more words on them? Let them send me packing when I ask bread of them. Not that, thank God, I have yet need of it, and should I ever come to be in need of it, I know, like the apostle, how to abound and to be in want, and so am minded to be beholden to none but myself. As for those who say that these matters fell out otherwise than as I relate them, I should account it no small favor if they would produce the originals, and should what I write not accord with them, I would acknowledge the justice of their censure, and study to amend my ways. But, until better evidence is forthcoming than their words, I shall adhere to my own opinion without seeking to deprive them of theirs, and give them tit for tat. And being minded that for this while this answer suffice, I say that with God and you, in whom I trust, most gentle ladies, to aid and protect me, and patience for my stay, I shall go forward with my work, turning my back on this tempest, however it may rage. For I see not that I can fare worse than the fine dust, which the blast of the whirlwind either leaves where it lies, or bears aloft, not seldom over the heads of men, over the crowns of kings, of emperors, and sometimes suffers to settle on the roofs of lofty palaces, and the summits of the tallest towers, whence if it fall, it cannot sink lower than the level from which it was raised. And if I ever devoted myself and all my powers to minister in any wise to your gratification, I am now minded more than ever so to do, because I know that there is naught that any can justly say in regard thereof, but that I, and others who love you, follow the promptings of nature, whose laws whoso would withstand, has need of powers preeminent, and even so, will oft times labor not merely in vain, but to his own most grievous disadvantage. Such powers I own that I neither have, nor, to such end, desire to have, and had I them, I would rather leave them to another than use them myself. Wherefore let my detractors hold their peace, and if they cannot get heat, why, let them shiver their life away and, while they remain addicted to their delights, or rather corrupt tastes, let them leave me to follow my own bent during the brief life that is accorded us. But this has been a long digression, fair ladies, and 'tis time to retrace our steps to the point where we deviated, and continue in the course on which we started. The sun had chased every star from the sky, and lifted the dank murk of night from the earth, when, Philostrato being risen, and having roused all his company, they hied them to the fair garden, and there fell to disporting themselves. The time for breakfast being come, they took it where they had supped on the preceding evening, and after they had slept they rose, when the sun was in his zenith, and seated themselves in their wonted manner by the beautiful fountain. Where Fiammetta, being bidden by Philostrato to lead off the storytelling, awaited no second command, but debonairly thus began. Novel I. Tancred, Prince of Salerno, slays his daughter's lover, and sends her his heart in a golden cup. She pours upon it a poisonous distillation, which she drinks and dies. A direful theme has our king allotted us for today's discourse, seeing that, whereas we are here met for our common delectation, needs must we now tell of others' tears, whereby, whether telling or hearing, we cannot but be moved to pity. Perchance, 'twas to temper in some degree the gaiety of the past days that he so ordained, but, whatever may have been his intent, his will must be to me immutable law. Wherefore I will narrate to you a matter that befell piteously, nay woefully, and so as you may well weep thereat. Tancred, Prince of Salerno, a lord most humane and kind of heart, but that in his old age he imbrued his hands in the blood of a lover, had in the whole course of his life but one daughter. And had he not had her, he had been more fortunate. Never was daughter more tenderly beloved of father than she of the prince, who, for that cause not knowing how to part with her, kept her unmarried for many a year after she had come of marriageable age. Then at last he gave her to a son of the Duke of Capua, with whom she had lived but a short while, when he died, and she returned to her father. Most lovely was she of form and feature, never woman more so, and young and light of heart, and more knowing, perchance, than beseemed a woman. Dwelling thus with her loving father, as a great lady, in no small luxury, nor failing to see that the prince, for the great love he bore her, was at no pains to provide her with another husband, and deeming it unseemly on her part to ask one of him, she cast about how she might come by a gallant to be her secret lover. And seeing at her father's court not a few men, both gentle and simple, that resorted thither, as we know men used to frequent courts, and closely scanning their mien and manners, she preferred before all others the prince's page, Guiscardo by name, a man of very humble origin, but preeminent for native worth and noble bearing, of whom, seeing him frequently, she became hotly enamored, hourly extolling his qualities more and more highly. The young man, who for all his youth by no means lacked shrewdness, read her heart, and gave her his own on such wise that his love for her engrossed his mind to the exclusion of almost everything else. While thus they burned in secret for one another, the lady, desiring of all things a meeting with Guiscardo, but being shy of making any her confidant, hit upon a novel expedient to concert the affair with him. She wrote him a letter containing her commands for the ensuing day, and thrust it into a cane in the space between two of the knots, which cane she gave to Guiscardo, saying, "Thou canst let thy servant have it for a bellows to blow thy fire up tonight." Guiscardo took it, and feeling sure that 'twas not unadvisedly that she made him such a present, accompanied with such words, hied him straight home, where, carefully examining the cane, he observed that it was cleft, and opening it, found the letter, which he had no sooner read and learned what he was to do than, pleased as ne'er another, he fell to devising how to set all in order that he might not fail to meet the lady on the following day, after the manner she had prescribed. Now hard by the prince's palace was a grotto, hewn in days of old in the solid rock, and now long disused, so that an artificial orifice, by which it received a little light, was all but choked with brambles and plants that grew about and overspread it. From one of the ground-floor rooms of the palace, which room was part of the lady's suite, a secret stair led to the grotto, though the entrance was barred by a very strong door. This stair, having been from time immemorial disused, had passed out of mind so completely that there was scarce any that remembered that it was there. But love, whose eyes nothing, however secret, may escape, had brought it to the mind of the enamored lady. For many a day, using all secrecy, that none should discover her, she had wrought with her tools, until she had succeeded in opening the door. Which done, she had gone down into the grotto alone, and having observed the orifice, had by her letter apprised Guiscardo of its apparent height above the floor of the grotto, and bidden him contrive some means of descending thereby. Eager to carry the affair through, Guiscardo lost no time in rigging up a ladder of ropes, whereby he might ascend and descend. And having put on a suit of leather to protect him from the brambles, he hied him the following night, keeping the affair close from all to the orifice, made the ladder fast by one of its ends to a massive trunk that was rooted in the mouth of the orifice, climbed down the ladder, and awaited the lady. On the morrow, making as if she would fain sleep, the lady dismissed her damsels and locked herself into her room. She then opened the door of the grotto, hied her down, and met Guiscardo, to their marvelous mutual satisfaction. The lovers then repaired to her room, where in exceeding great joyance they spent no small part of the day. Nor were they neglectful of the precautions needful to prevent discovery of their amour. But in due time, Guiscardo returned to the grotto, whereupon the lady locked the door and rejoined her damsels. At nightfall Guiscardo rescended his ladder, and, issuing forth of the orifice, hied him home. Nor, knowing now the way, did he fail to revisit the grotto many a time thereafter. But fortune, noting with envious eye a happiness of such degree and duration, gave to events a dolorous turn, whereby the joy of the two lovers was converted into bitter lamentation. 'Twas Tancred's custom to come from time to time quite alone to his daughter's room, and tarry talking with her a while. Whereby it so befell that he came down there one day after breakfast, while Gismond de Such was the lady's name was in her garden with her damsels, so that none saw or heard him enter, nor would he call his daughter, for he was minded that she should not forego her pleasure. But finding the windows closed and the bed curtains drawn down, he seated himself on a divan that stood at one of the corners of the bed, rested his head on the bed, drew the curtain over him, and thus, hidden as if of set purpose, fell asleep. As he slept, Gismonda, who, as it happened, had caused Guiscardo to come that day, left her damsels in the garden, softly entered the room, and having locked herself in, unwitting that there was another in the room, opened the door to Guiscardo, who was in waiting. Straightway they got them to bed, as was their wont, and, while they there solaced and disported them together, it so befell that Tancred awoke, and heard and saw what they did. Whereat he was troubled beyond measure, and at first was minded to upbraid them. But on second thoughts he deemed it best to hold his peace, and avoid discovery, if so he might with greater stealth and less dishonor carry out the design which was already in his mind. The two lovers continued long together, as they were wont, all unwitting of Tancred. But at length they saw fit to get out of bed, when Guiscardo went back to the grotto, and the lady hied her forth of the room. Whereupon Tancred, old though he was, got out at one of the windows, clambered down into the garden, and, seen by none, returned sorely troubled to his room. By his command 2 men took Guiscardo early that same night, as he issued forth of the orifice accoutred in his suit of leather, and brought him privily to Tancred, who, as he saw him, all but wept and said, "Guiscardo, my kindness to thee is ill requited by the outrage and dishonor which thou hast done me in the person of my daughter, as today I have seen with my own eyes." To whom Guiscardo could answer naught but, "Love is more potent than either. You or I." Tancred then gave order to keep him privily under watch and ward in a room within the palace, and so 'twas done. Next day, while Gismonda wotted not of these matters, Tancred, after pondering divers novel expedients, hied him after breakfast, according to his wont, to his daughter's room, where, having called her to him and locked himself in with her, he began, not without tears, to speak on this wise. Gismonda, conceiving that I knew thy virtue and honor, never, though it had been reported to me, would I have credited, had I not seen with my own eyes, that thou wouldst so much as in idea, not to say fact, have ever yielded thyself to any man but thy husband. Wherefore, for the brief residue of life that my age has in store for me, the memory of thy fall will ever be grievous to me. And would to God, as thou must needs demean thyself to such dishonor, thou hadst taken a man that matched thy nobility. But of all the men that frequent my court, thou must needs choose Guiscardo, a young man of the lowest condition, a fellow whom we brought up in charity from his tender years, for whose sake thou hast plunged me into the abyss of mental tribulation, insomuch that I know not what course to take in regard of thee. As to Guiscardo, whom I caused to be arrested last night as he issued from the orifice, and keep in durance, my course is already taken, but how I am to deal with thee, God knows, I know not. I am distraught between the love which I have ever borne thee, love such as no father ever bare to daughter, and the most just indignation evoked in me by thy signal folly. My love prompts me to pardon thee, my indignation bids me harden my heart against thee, though I do violence to my nature. But before I decide upon my course, I would fain hear what thou hast to say to this. So saying, he bent his head, and wept as bitterly as any child that had been soundly thrashed. Her father's words, and the tidings they conveyed that not only was her secret passion discovered, but Guiscardo taken, caused Gismonda immeasurable grief, which she was again and again on the point of evincing, as most women do, by cries and tears. But her high spirit triumphed over this weakness. By a prodigious effort she composed her countenance, and taking it for granted that her Guiscardo was no more, she inly devoted herself to death rather than a single prayer for herself should escape her lips. Wherefore, not as a woman stricken with grief or chidden for a fault, but unconcerned and unabashed, with tearless eyes, and frank and utterly dauntless mien, thus answered she her father. Tancred, your accusation I shall not deny, neither will I cry you mercy, for naught should I gain by denial, nor aught would I gain by supplication. Nay more, there is naught I will do to conciliate thy humanity and love. My only care is to confess the truth, to defend my honor by words of sound reason, and then by deeds most resolute to give effect to the promptings of my high soul. True it is that I have loved and love Guiscardo, and during the brief while I have yet to live shall love him, nor after death, so there be then love, shall I cease to love him. But that I love him is not imputable to my womanly frailty so much as to the little zeal thou shewedst for my bestowal in marriage, and to Guiscardo's own worth. It should not have escaped thee, Tancred, creature of flesh and blood as thou art, that thy daughter was also a creature of flesh and blood, and not of stone or iron. It was, and is, thy duty to bear in mind, old though thou art, the nature and the might of the laws to which youth is subject. And though thou hast spent part of thy best years in martial exercises, thou shouldst nevertheless have not been ignorant how potent is the influence even upon the aged, to say nothing of the young of ease and luxury. And not only am I, as being thy daughter, a creature of flesh and blood, but my life is not so far spent but that I am still young, and thus doubly fraught with fleshly appetite, the vehemence whereof is marvelously enhanced by reason that, having been married, I have known the pleasure that ensues upon the satisfaction of such desire. Which forces being powerless to withstand, I did but act as was natural in a young woman, when I gave way to them and yielded myself to love. Nor in sooth did I fail to the utmost of my power, so to order the indulgence of my natural propensity, that my sin should bring shame neither upon thee nor upon me. To which end love in his pity, and fortune in a friendly mood, found and discovered to me a secret way, whereby, none witting, I attained my desire. This, from whomsoever thou hast learned it, howsoever thou comest to know it, I deny not. 'Twas not at random, as many women do, that I loved Guiscardo, but by deliberate choice I preferred him before all other men, and of determinate forethought I lured him to my love, whereof, through his and my discretion and constancy, I have long had joyance. Wherein 'twould seem that thou, following rather the opinion of the vulgar than the dictates of truth, find cause to chide me more severely than in my sinful love, For, as if thou wouldst not have been vexed, had my choice fallen on a nobleman, thou complainest that I have forgathered with a man of low condition. And dost not see that therein thou censurest not my fault, but that of fortune, which not seldom raises the unworthy to high place and leaves the worthiest in low estate. But leave we this. Consider a little the principles of things. Thou seest that in regard of our flesh we are all molded of the same substance, and that all souls are endowed by one and the same Creator with equal faculties, equal powers, equal virtues. 'Twas merit that made the first distinction between us, born as we were, nay, as we are, all equal. And those whose merits were and were approved in act the greatest were called noble, and the rest were not so denoted. Which law, albeit overlaid by the contrary usage of after times, is not yet abrogated, nor so impaired but that it is still traceable in nature and good manners. For which cause whoso with merit acts, does plainly show himself a gentleman. And if any denote him otherwise, the default is his own and not his whom he so denotes. Pass in review all thy nobles, weigh their merits, their manners and bearing, and then compare Guiscardo's qualities with theirs. If thou wilt judge without prejudice, thou wilt pronounce him noble in the highest degree, and thy nobles one and all churls. As to Guiscardo's merits and worth I did, but trust the verdict which thou thyself didst utter in words, and which mine own eyes confirmed. Of whom had he such commendation as of thee for all those excellences, whereby a good man and true merits commendation? And in sooth thou didst him but justice, for unless mine eyes have played me false, there was naught for which thou didst commend him, but I had seen him practice it, and that more admirably than words of thine might express. And had I been at all deceived in this matter, 'twould have been by thee. Wilt thou say, then, that I have forgathered with a man of low condition? If so, thou wilt not say true. Didst thou say with a poor man, the impeachment might be allowed, to thy shame, that thou so ill hast known how to requite a good man and true that is thy servant. But poverty, though it take away all else, deprives no man of gentleness. Many kings, many great princes, were once poor, and many a ditcher or herdsman has been, and is very wealthy. As for thy last perpended doubt, to wit, how thou shouldst deal with me, banish it utterly from thy thoughts. If in thy extreme old age thou art minded to manifest a harshness unwanted in thy youth, wreak thy harshness on me, resolved as I am to cry thee no mercy, prime cause as I am that this sin, if sin it be, has been committed. For of this I warrant thee, that as thou mayst have done or shalt do to Guiscardo, if to me thou do not the like, I with my own hands will do it. Now get thee gone to shed thy tears with the women, and when thy melting mood is over, ruthlessly destroy Guiscardo and me, if such thou deem our merited doom, by one and the same blow. The loftiness of his daughter's spirit was not unknown to the prince, but still he did not credit her with a resolve quite as firmly fixed as her words implied, to carry their purport into effect. So, parting from her without the least intention of using harshness towards her in her own person, he determined to quench the heat of her love by wreaking his vengeance on her lover, and bade the two men that had charge of Guiscardo to strangle him noiselessly that same night, take the heart out of the body, and send it to him. The men did his bidding, and on the morrow the prince had a large and beautiful cup of gold brought to him, and having put Guiscardo's heart therein, sent it by the hand of one of his most trusted servants to his daughter, charging the servant to say, as he gave it to her, "Thy father sends thee this to give thee joy of that which thou lovest best, even as thou hast given him joy of that which he loved best." Now when her father had left her, Gismonda, wavering not a jot in her stern resolve, had sent for poisonous herbs and roots, and therefrom had distilled a water, to have it ready for use, if that which she apprehended should come to pass. And when the servant appeared with the prince's present and message, she took the cup unblenchingly, and having lifted the lid and seen the heart, and apprehended the meaning of the words, and that the heart was beyond a doubt Guiscardo's, she raised her head, and looking straight at the servant, said, "Sepulture less honorable than of gold had ill befitted heart such as this. Herein has my father done wisely." Which said, she raised it to her lips and kissed it, saying, "In all things and at all times, even to this last hour of my life, have I found my father most tender in his love, but now more so than ever before. Wherefore I now render him the last thanks which will ever be due from me to him for this goodly present." So she spoke, and straining the cup to her, bowed her head over it, and gazing at the heart said, "Ah, sojourn most sweet of all my joys, accursed be he by whose ruthless act one see thee with the bodily eye. 'Twas enough that to the mind's eye thou wert hourly present. Thou hast run thy course, thou hast closed the span that fortune allotted thee. Thou hast reached the goal of all, thou hast left behind thee the woes and weariness of the world, and thy enemy has himself granted thee sepulture accordant with thy deserts. No circumstance was wanting to duly celebrate thy obsequies, save the tears of her whom, while thou livest, thou didst so dearly love. Which that thou shouldst not lack, my remorseless father was prompted of God to send thee to me, and albeit my resolve was fixed to die with eyes unmoistened and front all unperturbed by fear, yet will I accord thee my tears. Which done, my care shall be forthwith by thy means to join my soul to that most precious soul which thou didst once enshrine. And is there other company than hers, in which with more of joy and peace I might fare to the abodes unknown? She is yet here within, I doubt not, contemplating the abodes of her and my delights, and for sure I am that she loves me, awaiting my soul that loves her before all else." Having thus spoken, she bowed herself low over the cup, and while no womanish cry escaped her, 'twas as if a fountain of water were unloosed within her head, so wondrous a flood of tears gushed from her eyes, while times without number she kissed the dead heart. Her damsels that stood around her knew not whose the heart might be or what her words might mean, but melting in sympathy, they all wept, and compassionately, as vainly, enquired the cause of her lamentation, and in many other ways sought to comfort her to the best of their understanding and power. When she had wept her fill, she raised her head and dried her eyes. "Then, O heart," said she, "much cherished heart, discharged is my every duty towards thee. Naught now remains for me to do but to come and unite my soul with thine." So saying, she sent for the vase that held the water which the day before she had distilled, and emptied it into the cup where lay the heart bathed in her tears. Then, nowise afraid, she set her mouth to the cup, and drained it dry. And so with the cup in her hand she got her upon her bed, and having there disposed her person in guise as seemly as she might, laid her dead lover's heart upon her own, and silently awaited death. Meanwhile the damsels, seeing and hearing what passed, but knowing not what the water was that she had drunk, had sent word of each particular to Tancred, who, apprehensive of that which came to pass, came down with all haste to his daughter's room, where he arrived just as she got her upon her bed, and now too late addressed himself to comfort her with soft words, and seeing in what plight she was, burst into a flood of bitter tears. To whom the lady, "Reserve thy tears, Tancred, till fortune send thee hap less longed for than this. Waste them not on me who care not for them. Whoever yet saw any, but thee bewail the consummation of his desire. But if of the love thou once didst bear me any spark still lives in thee, be it thy parting grace to me, that, as thou brookest not that I should live with Guiscardo in privity and seclusion, so wherever thou mayst have caused Guiscardo's body to be cast, mine may be united with it in the common view of all." The prince replied not for excess of grief, and the lady, feeling that her end was come, strained the dead heart to her bosom, saying, "Fare ye well, I take my leave of you," and with eyelids drooped and every sense evanished departed this life of woe. Such was the lamentable end of the loves of Guiscardo and Gismonda, whom Tancred, tardily repentant of his harshness, mourned not a little, as did also all the folk of Salerno, and had honorably interred side by side in the same tomb. Novel 2. Fra Alberto gives a lady to understand that she is beloved of the angel Gabriel, in whose shape he lies with her sundry times. Afterward, for fear of her kinsmen, he flings himself forth of her house, and finds shelter in the house of a poor man, who on the morrow leads him in the guise of a wild man into the piazza, where, being recognized, he is apprehended by his brethren and imprisoned. More than once had Fiametta's story brought tears to the eyes of her fair companions, but now that it was ended the king said with an austere air, "Should esteem my life but a paltry price to pay for half the delight that Gismonda had with Guiscardo, whereat no lady of you all should marvel, seeing that each hour that I live I die 1,000 deaths, nor is there so much as a particle of compensating joy allotted me. But a truce to my own concerns. I ordain that Pampinea do next ensue our direful argument, wherewith the tenor of my life in part accords, and if she follow in Fiametta's footsteps, I doubt not I shall presently feel some drops of dew distill upon my fire. Pampania received the king's command in a spirit more accordant with what from her own bent she divined to be the wishes of her fair gossips than with the king's words. Wherefore, being minded rather to afford them some diversion, then, save as in duty bound, to satisfy the king, she made choice of a story which, without deviating from the prescribed theme, should move a laugh, and thus began. 'Tis a proverb current among the vulgar that, whoso, being wicked, is righteous reputed, may sin as he will, and 'twill ne'er be imputed. Which proverb furnishes me with abundant matter of discourse, germane to our theme, besides occasion to exhibit the quality and degree of the hypocrisy of the religious, who flaunt it in ample flowing robes, and, with faces made pallid by art, with voices low and gentle to beg alms, most loud and haughty to reprove in others their own sins, would make believe that their way of salvation lies in taking from us and ours in giving to them. Nay, more, as if they had not like us paradise to win, but were already its lords and masters, assigned therein to each that dies a place more or less exalted according to the amount of the money that he has bequeathed to them, which, if they believe, 'tis by dint of self-delusion, and to the effect of deluding all that put faith in their words. Of whose guile were it lawful for me to make as full exposure as were fitting, not a few simple folk should soon be enlightened as to what they cloak within the folds of their voluminous habits. But would to God all might have the like reward of their lies as a certain friar minor, no novice, but one that was reputed among their greatest, one at Venice, whose story, rather than aught else, I am minded to tell you, if so I may, perchance, by laughter and jollity relieve in some degree your souls that are heavy laden with pity for the death of Gismonda. Know then, noble ladies, that there was in Imola a man of evil and corrupt life, Berto della Massa by name, whose pestilent practices came at length to be so well known to the good folk of Imola that 'twas all one whether he lied or spoke the truth, for there was not a soul in Imola that believed a word he said. Wherefore, seeing that his tricks would pass no longer there, he removed, as in despair, to Venice, that common sink of all abominations, thinking there to find other means than he had found elsewhere to the prosecution of his nefarious designs. And, as if conscience-stricken for his past misdeeds, he assumed an air of the deepest humility, turned the best Catholic of them all, and went and made himself a friar minor, taking the name of Fra Alberto de Imola. With his habit he put on a show of austerity, highly commending penitence and abstinence, and eating or drinking no sort of meat or wine but such as was to his taste. And scarce a soul was there that wist that the thief, the pimp, the cheat, the assassin, had not been suddenly converted into a great preacher without continuing in the practice of the said iniquities, whensoever the same was privily possible. And withal, having got himself made priest, as often as he celebrated at the altar, he would weep over the passion of our Lord, so there were folk in plenty to see, for tears cost him little enough, when he had a mind to shed them. In short, what with his sermons and his tears, he duped the folk of Venice to such a tune that scarce a will was there made, but he was its executor and depositary. Nay, not a few made him trustee of their moneys, and most, or well nigh most, men and women alike, their confessor and counselor. In short, he had put off the wolf and put on the shepherd, and the fame of his holiness was such in those parts that St. Francis himself had never the like at Assisi. Now it so befell that among the ladies that came to confess to this holy friar was one Monna Lysetta of Ca Quirino, the young, silly, empty-headed wife of a great merchant, who was gone with the galleys to Flanders. Like a Venetian for unstable are they, although she placed herself at his feet, she told him but a part of her sins, and when Fra Alberto asked her whether she had a lover, she replied with black looks, "How now, Master Friar? Have you not eyes in your head? See you no difference between my charms and those of other women? Lovers in plenty might I have, so I would, but charms such as mine must not be cheapened. 'Tis not every man that might presume to love me. How many ladies have you seen whose beauty is comparable to mine? Should adorn paradise itself, whereto she added so much more in praise of her beauty that the friar could scarce hear her with patience. Howbeit, discerning at a glance that she was none too well furnished with sense, he deemed the soil meet for his plough, and fell forthwith inordinately in love with her, though he deferred his blandishments to a more convenient season, and by way of supporting his character for holiness began instead to chide her, telling her, among other novelties, that this was vainglory. Whereto the lady retorted that he was a blockhead, and could not distinguish one degree of beauty from another. Wherefore Fra Alberto, lest he should occasion her too much chagrin, cut short the confession, and suffered her to depart with the other ladies. Some days after, accompanied by a single trusty friend, he hied him to Monna Licetta's house, and having withdrawn with her alone into a saloon, where they were safe from observation, he fell on his knees at her feet and said, "Madam, for the love of God, I crave your pardon of that which I said to you on Sunday, when you spoke to me of your beauty, for so grievously was I chastised therefore that very night. That 'tis but today that I have been able to quit my bed." "And by whom," quoth my lady Battledore, "were you so chastised?" "I will tell you," returned Fra Alberto. "That night I was, as is ever my wont, at my orisons, when suddenly a great light shone in my cell, and before I could turn me to see what it was, I saw standing over me a right goodly youth with a stout cudgel in his hand, who seized me by the habit and threw me at his feet, and belabored me till I was bruised from head to foot. And when I asked him why he used me thus, he answered, "'Tis because thou didst today presume to speak slightingly of the celestial charms of Monna Licetta, whom I love next to God himself." Whereupon I asked, "And who are you?" And he made answer that he was the angel Gabriel. Then said I, "O my lord, I pray you pardon me." Whereto he answered, "I pardon thee on condition that thou go to her, with what speed thou mayst, and obtain her pardon, which if she accord thee not, I shall come back hither and give thee belaborings enough with my cudgel to make thee a sad man for the rest of thy days." What more he said, I dare not tell you, unless you first pardon me. Whereat our flimsy, pumpy, and patched Lady Lackbrain was overjoyed, taking all the friar's words for gospel. So after a while she said, "And did I not tell you, Fra Alberto, that my charms were celestial? But so help me God, I am moved to pity of you, and forthwith I pardon you, lest worse should befall you, so only you tell me what more the angel said." "So will I gladly, madam," returned Fra Alberto, "now that I have your pardon. This only I bid you bear in mind, that you have a care that never a soul in the world hear from you a single word of what I shall say to you, if you would not spoil your good fortune, wherein there is not today in the whole world a lady that may compare with you. Know then that the angel Gabriel bade me tell you that you stand so high in his favor that again and again he would have come to pass the night with you, but that he doubted he should affright you. So now he sends you word through me that he would fain come one night and stay a while with you. And seeing that, being an angel, if he should visit you in his angelic shape, he might not be touched by you, he would, to pleasure you, present himself in human shape. And so he bids you send him word, when you would have him come, and in whose shape, and he will come, for which cause you may deem yourself more blessed than any other lady that lives." My Lady Vanity then said that she was highly flattered to be beloved of the angel Gabriel, whom she herself loved so well that she had never grudged for soldi to burn a candle before his picture, wherever she saw it, and that he was welcome to visit her as often as he liked, and would always find her alone in her room. On the understanding, however, that he should not desert her for the Virgin Mary, whom she had heard he did mightily affect, and indeed, 'twould so appear, for, wherever she saw him, he was always on his knees at her feet. For the rest he might even come in what shape he pleased, so that it was not such as to terrify her. Then said Fra Alberto, "Madam, 'tis wisely spoken, and I will arrange it all with him just as you say. But 'tis in your power to do me a great favor, which will cost you nothing. And this favor is that you be consenting that he visit you in my shape. Now hear wherein you will confer this favor. Thus will it be, he will disembody my soul and set it in paradise, entering himself into my body, and, as long as he shall be with you, my soul will be in paradise." Whereto my Lady Slenderwit, "So be it," she said. "I am well pleased that you have this solace to salve the bruises that he gives you on my account." "Good," said Fra Alberto. "Then you will see to it that tonight he find, when he comes, your outer door unlatched, that he may have ingress, for, coming, as he will in human shape, he will not be able to enter save by the door." "It shall be done," replied the lady. Whereupon Fra Alberto took his leave, and the lady remained in such a state of exaltation that her nether end knew not her chemise, and it seemed to her 1,000 years until the angel Gabriel should come to visit her. Fra Alberto, bethinking him that 'twas not as an angel, but as a cavalier that he must acquit himself that night, fell to fortifying himself with comfits and other dainties, that he might not lose his saddle for slight cause. Then, leave of absence gotten, he betook him at nightfall, with a single companion, to the house of a woman that was his friend, which house had served on former occasions as his base when he went chasing the fillies. And having there disguised himself, he hied him, when he deemed 'twas time, to the house of the lady, where, donning the gewgaws he had brought with him, he transformed himself into an angel, and going up, entered the lady's chamber. No sooner saw she this dazzling apparition than she fell on her knees before the angel, who gave her his blessing, raised her to her feet, and motioned her to go to bed. She, nothing loath, obeyed forthwith, and the angel lay down beside his devotee. Now, Fra Alberto was a stout, handsome fellow, whose legs bore themselves right bravely. And being bedded with Monna Lysetta, who was lusty and delicate, he covered her after another fashion than her husband had been wont, and took many a flight that night without wings, so that she heartily cried him content, and not a little therewithal did he tell her of the glory celestial. Then towards daybreak, all being ready for his return, he hied him forth and repaired, caparisoned as he was, to his friend, whom, lest he should be affrighted, sleeping alone, the good woman of the house had solaced with her company. The lady, so soon as she had breakfasted, betook her to Fra Alberto, and reported the angel Gabriel's visit, and what he had told her of the glory of the life eternal, describing his appearance, not without some added marvels of her own invention. Whereto Fra Alberto replied, "Madam, I know not how you fared with him, but this I know, that last night he came to me, and for that I had done his errand with you, he suddenly transported my soul among such a multitude of flowers and roses as was never seen here below, and my soul what became of my body I know not tarried in one of the most delightful places that ever was from that hour until matins. As for your body," said the lady, "do I not tell you whose it was? It lay all night long with the angel Gabriel in my arms, and if you believe me not, you have but to took under your left pap, where I gave the angel a mighty kiss, of which the mark will last for some days." "Why then," said Fra Alberto, "I will even do today what 'tis long since I did, to wit undress, that I may see if you say sooth." So they fooled it a long while, and then the lady went home, where Fra Alberto afterwards paid her many a visit without any let. However, one day it so befell that while Monna Lysetta was with one of her gossips canvassing beauties, she, being minded to exalt her own charms above all others, and having, as we know, none too much wit in her pumpion pate, observed, "Did you but know by whom my charms are prized, then, for sure, you would have naught to say of the rest." Her gossip all agog to hear, for well she knew her foible, answered, "Madam, it may be as you say, but still, while one knows not who he may be, one cannot alter one's mind so rapidly." Whereupon my lady Featherbrain, "Gossip," said she, "'tis not for common talk, but he that I wot of is the angel Gabriel, who loves me more dearly than himself, for that I am, so he tells me, the fairest lady in all the world, aye, and in the Maremma to boot." 2. Whereat her gossip would fain have laughed, but held herself in, being minded to hear more from her. Wherefore she said, "God's faith, madam, if 'tis the angel Gabriel and he tells you so, why, so of course it must needs be, but I wist not the angels meddled with such matters." "There you erred, gossip," said the lady. "Zounds, he does it better than my husband, and he tells me they do it above there too, but as he rates my charms above any that are in heaven, he is enamored of me and not seldom visits me. So now dost see." So away went the gossip so agog to tell the story, that it seemed to her 1,000 years till she was where it might be done. And being met for recreation with a great company of ladies, she narrated it all in detail, whereby it passed to the ladies' husbands, and to other ladies, and from them to yet other ladies, so that in less than 2 days all Venice was full of it. But among others, whose ears it reached, were Monna Lysetta's brothers-in-law, who, keeping their own counsel, resolved to find this angel and make out whether he knew how to fly, to which end they kept watch for some nights. Whereof no hint, as it happened, reached Fra Alberto's ears. And so, one night when he was come to enjoy the lady once more, he was scarce undressed when her brothers-in-law, who had seen him come, were at the door of the room and already opening it, when Fra Alberto, hearing the noise and apprehending the danger, started up, and having no other resource, threw open a window that looked on to the Grand Canal, and plunged into the water. The depth was great, and he was an expert swimmer, so that he took no hurt, but, having reached the other bank, found a house open, and forthwith entered it, praying the good man that was within, for God's sake to save his life, and trumping up a story to account for his being there at so late an hour and stripped to the skin. The good man took pity on him, and having occasion to go out, he put him in his own bed, bidding him stay there until his return. And so, having locked him in, he went about his business. Now when the lady's brothers-in-law entered the room, and found that the angel Gabriel had taken flight, leaving his wings behind him, being balked of their prey, they roundly rated the lady, and then, leaving her disconsolate, betook themselves home with the angel's spoils. Whereby it befell that, when 'twas broad day, the good man, being on the Rialto, heard tell how the angel Gabriel had come to pass the night with Monna Lysetta, and, being surprised by her brothers-in-law, had taken fright, and thrown himself into the canal, and none knew what was become of him. The good man guessed in a trice that the said angel was no other than the man he had at home, whom on his return he recognized, and, after much chaffering, brought him to promise him 50 ducats that he might not be given up to the lady's brothers-in-law. The bargain struck, Fra Alberto signified a desire to be going. Whereupon, there is no way, said the good man, but one if you are minded to take it. Today we hold a revel, wherein folk lead others about in various disguises, as one man will present a bear, another a wild man, and so forth. And then in the piazza of San Marco there is a hunt, which done, the revel is ended, and then away they hie them, whither they will, each with the man he is led about. If you are willing to be led by me in one or another of these disguises, before it can get wind that you are here, I can bring you whither you would go. Otherwise I see not how you are to quit this place without being known. And the lady's brothers-in-law, reckoning that you must be lurking somewhere in this quarter, have set guards all about to take you. Loath indeed was Fra Alberto to go in such a guise, but such was his fear of the lady's relations that he consented, and told the good man whither he desired to be taken, and that he was content to leave the choice of the disguise to him. The good man then smeared him all over with honey, and covered him with down, set a chain on his neck and a vizard on his face, gave him a stout cudgel to carry in one hand, and 2 huge dogs, which he had brought from the shambles, to lead with the other, and sent a man to the Rialto to announce that whoso would see the angel Gabriel should hie him to the piazza of San Marco, in all which he acted as a leal Venetian. And so, after a while, he led him forth, and then, making him go before, held him by the chain behind, and through a great throng that clamored, "What manner of thing is this? What manner of thing is this?" He brought him to the piazza, where, what with those that followed them, and those that had come from the Rialto on hearing the announcement, there were folk without end. Arrived at the piazza, he fastened his wild man to a column in a high and exposed place, making as if he were minded to wait till the hunt should begin, whereby the flies and gadflies, attracted by the honey with which he was smeared, caused him most grievous distress. However, the good man waited only until the piazza was thronged, and then, making as if he would unchain his wild man, he tore the vizard from Fra Alberto's face, saying, "Gentlemen, as the boar comes not to the hunt, and the hunt does not take place, that it be not for nothing that you are come hither, I am minded to give you a view of the angel Gabriel, who comes down from heaven to earth by night to solace the ladies of Venice." The vizard was no sooner withdrawn than all recognized Fra Alberto, and greeted him with hootings, rating him in language as offensive and opprobrious as ever rogue was abused withal, and pelting him in the face with every sort of filth that came to hand. In which plight they kept him an exceeding great while, until by chance the brute thereof reached his brethren, of whom some 6 thereupon put themselves in motion, and, arrived at the piazza, clapped a habit on his back, and unchained him, and amid an immense uproar led him off to their convent, where, after languishing a while in prison, 'tis believed that he died. So this man, by reason that, being reputed righteous, he did evil, and 'twas not imputed to him, presumed to counterfeit the angel Gabriel, and being transformed into a wild man, was in the end put to shame, as he deserved, and vainly bewailed his misdeeds. God grant that so it may betide all his likes. 1 Demagier Cassasi. No such word as Cassasi is known to the lexicographers or commentators, and no plausible emendation has yet been suggested. 2. With this ineptitude cf. The Friar's Flowers and Roses on the preceding page. Novel 3. 3 young men love 3 sisters, and flee with them to Crete. The eldest of the sisters slays her lover for jealousy. The second saves the life of the first by yielding herself to the Duke of Crete. Her lover slays her and makes off with the first. The third sister and her lover are charged with the murder, are arrested, and confess the crime. They escape death by bribing the guards, flee destitute to Rhodes, and there in destitution die. Pampinia's story ended. Philostrato mused a while and then said to her, "A little good matter there was that pleased me at the close of your story, but before 'twas reached, there was far too much to laugh at, which I could have wished had not been there." Then, turning to Loretta, he said, "Madam, give us something better to follow, if so it may be." Loretta replied with a laugh, "Harsh beyond measure are you to the lovers, to desire that their end be always evil. But as in duty bound, I will tell a story of three, who all alike came to a bad end, having had little joyance of their loves." And so saying, she began. "Well may ye wot, young ladies, for 'tis abundantly manifest, that there is no vice but most grievous disaster may ensue thereon to him that practices it, and not seldom to others. And of all the vices that which hurries us into peril with loosest rein is, methinks, anger, which is naught but a rash and hasty impulse, prompted by a feeling of pain, which banishes reason, shrouds the eyes of the mind in thick darkness, and sets the soul ablaze with a fierce frenzy. Which, though it not seldom befall men, and one rather than another, has nevertheless been observed to be fraught in women with more disastrous consequences, inasmuch as in them the flame is both more readily kindled, and burns more brightly, and with less impediment to its vehemence. Wherein is no cause to marvel, for, if we consider it, we shall see that 'tis of the nature of fire to lay hold more readily of things light and delicate than of matters of firmer and more solid substance. And sure it is that we, without offense to the men be it spoken, are more delicate than they, and much more mobile. Wherefore, seeing how prone we are thereto by nature, and considering also our gentleness and tenderness, how soothing and consolatory they are to the men with whom we consort, and that thus this madness of wrath is fraught with grievous annoy and peril. Therefore, that with stouter heart we may defend ourselves against it, I purpose by my story to show you how the loves of three young men, and as many ladies, as I said before, were by the anger of one of the ladies changed from a happy to a most woeful complexion. Marseille, as you know, is situate on the coast of Provence, a city ancient and most famous, and in old time the seat of many more rich men and great merchants than are to be seen there today, among whom was one Narnold Cluada by name, a man of the lowest origin, but a merchant of unsullied probity and integrity, and boundless wealth in lands and goods and money, who had by his lady several children, 3 of them being daughters, older, each of them, than the other children, who were sons. 2 of the daughters, who were twins, were, when my story begins, 15 years old, and the third was but a year younger, so that in order to their marriage their kinsfolk awaited nothing but the return of Narnold from Spain, whither he was gone with his merchandise. One of the twins was called Ninette, the other Madeline, the third daughter's name was Bertel. A young man, Rastagnan by name, who, though poor, was of gentle blood, was in the last degree enamored of Ninette, and she of him. And so discreetly had they managed the affair that never another soul in the world witting aught of it, they had joyance of their love, and that for a good while, when it so befell that 2 young friends of theirs, the one Fawkes, the other Hugues by name, whom their fathers, recently dead, had left very wealthy, fell in love, the one with Madeline, the other with Bertel. Whereof Rastagnan being apprised by Ninette bethought him, that in their love he might find a means to the relief of his necessities. He accordingly consorted freely and familiarly with them, accompanying, now one, now the other, and sometimes both of them, when they went to visit their ladies and his. And when he judged that he had made his footing as friendly and familiar as need was, he bade them one day to his house, and said, "Comrades most dear, our friendship, perchance, may not have left you without assurance of the great love I bear you, and that for you I would do even as much as for myself. Wherefore, loving you thus much, I purpose to impart to you that which is in my mind, that in regard thereof, you and I together may then resolve in such sort as to you shall seem the best. You, if I may trust your words, as also what I seem to have gathered from your demeanor by day and by night, burn with an exceeding great love for the 2 ladies whom you affect, as I for their sister. For the assuagement whereof, I have good hope that, if you will unite with me, I shall find means most sweet and delightsome, to wit, on this wise. You possess, as I do not, great wealth. Now if you are willing to make of your wealth a common stock with me as third partner therein, and to choose some part of the world where we may live in careless ease upon our substance, without any manner of doubt, I trust, so to prevail that the three sisters with great part of their father's substance shall come to live with us, wherever we shall see fit to go. Whereby, each with his own lady, we shall live as three brethren, the happiest men in the world. 'Tis now for you to determine whether you will embrace this proffered solace, or let it slip from you. The two young men, whose love was beyond all measure fervent, spared themselves the trouble of deliberation. 'Twas enough that they heard that they were to have their ladies, wherefore they answered, that, so this should ensue, they were ready to do as he proposed. Having thus their answer, Rastagnan a few days later was closeted with Ninette, to whom 'twas a matter of no small difficulty for him to get access. Nor had he been long with her before he adverted to what had passed between him and the young men, and sought to commend the project to her for reasons not a few. Little need, however, had he to urge her, for to live their life openly together was the very thing she desired, far more than he. Wherefore she frankly answered that she would have it so, that her sisters would do, more especially in this matter, just as she wished, and that he should lose no time in making all the needful arrangements. So Rastagnan returned to the two young men, who were most urgent that it should be done even as he said, and told them that on the part of the ladies the matter was concluded. And so, having fixed upon Crete for their destination, and sold some estates that they had, giving out that they were minded to go a-trading with the proceeds, they converted all else that they possessed into money, and bought a brigantine, which with all secrecy they handsomely equipped, anxiously expecting the time of their departure, while Ninette on her part, knowing well how her sisters were affected, did so by sweet converse foment their desire that, till it should be accomplished, they accounted their life as naught. The night of their embarkation being come, the three sisters opened a great chest that belonged to their father, and took out therefrom a vast quantity of money and jewels, with which they all three issued forth of the house in dead silence, as they had been charged, and found their three lovers awaiting them, who, having forthwith brought them aboard the brigantine, bade the rowers give way, and, tarrying nowhere, arrived the next evening at Genoa, where the new lovers had for the first time joyance and solace of their love. Having taken what they needed of refreshment, they resumed their course, touching at this port and that, and in less than 8 days, speeding without impediment, were come to Crete. There they bought them domains both beautiful and broad, whereon, hard by Candia, they built them mansions most goodly and delightsome, wherein they lived as barons, keeping a crowd of retainers, with dogs, hawks, and horses, and speeding the time with their ladies in feasting and revelling and merrymaking, none so light-hearted as they. Such being the tenor of their life, it so befell that, as 'tis matter of daily experience that, however delightsome a thing may be, superabundance thereof will breed disgust. Rastagnan, much as he had loved Ninette, being now able to have his joyance of her without stint or restraint, began to weary of her, and by consequence to abate somewhat of his love for her. And being mightily pleased with a fair gentlewoman of the country, whom he met at a merrymaking, he set his whole heart upon her, and began to show himself marvelously courteous and gallant towards her, which Ninette perceiving grew so jealous that he might not go a step but she knew of it, and resented it to his torment and her own with high words. But as, while superfluity engenders disgust, appetite is but whetted when fruit is forbidden, so Ninette's wrath added fuel to the flame of Rastagnan's new love. And whichever was the event, whether in course of time Rastagnan had the lady's favor or had it not, Ninette, whoever may have brought her the tidings, firmly believed that he had it. Whereby from the depths of distress, she passed into a towering passion, and thus was transported into such a frenzy of rage that all the love she bore to Rastagnan was converted into bitter hatred, and, blinded by her wrath, she made up her mind to avenge by Rastagnan's death the dishonor which she deemed that he had done her. So she had recourse to an old Greek woman that was very skillful in compounding poisons, whom by promises and gifts she induced to distill a deadly water, which, keeping her own counsel, she herself gave Rastagnan to drink one evening, when he was somewhat heated and quite off his guard. Whereby such was the efficacy of the water she dispatched Rastagnan before matins. On learning his death, Fawkes and Hugues and their ladies, who knew not that he had been poisoned, united their bitter with Ninette's vain lamentations, and gave him honorable sepulture. But so it befell that, not many days after, the old woman that had compounded the poison for Ninette was taken for another crime, and, being put to the torture, confessed the compounding of the poison among other of her misdeeds, and fully declared what had thereby come to pass. Wherefore the Duke of Crete, breathing no word of his intent, came privily by night, and set a guard around Falk's palace, where Ninette then was, and quietly and quite unopposed, took and carried her off, and without putting her to the torture, learned from her in a trice all that he sought to know touching the death of Rastagnan. Falks and Hugues had learned privily of the Duke, and their ladies of them, for what cause Ninette was taken, and, being mightily distressed thereby, bestirred themselves with all zeal to save Ninette from the fire, to which they apprehended she would be condemned, as having indeed richly deserved it. But all their endeavors seemed to avail nothing, for the Duke was unwaveringly resolved that justice should be done. Madeleine, Falk's fair wife, who had long been courted by the Duke, but had never deigned to show him the least favor, thinking that by yielding herself to his will she might redeem her sister from the fire, dispatched a trusty envoy to him with the intimation that she was entirely at his disposal upon the twofold condition, that in the first place her sister should be restored to her free and scatheless, and, in the second place, the affair should be kept secret. Albeit gratified by this overture, the Duke was long in doubt whether he should accept it. In the end, however, he made up his mind to do so, and signified his approval to the envoy. Then, with the lady's consent, he put Falks and Hugues under arrest for a night, as if he were minded to examine them of the affair, and meanwhile quartered himself privily with Madeleine. Ninette, who, he had made believe, had been set in a sack, and was to be sunk in the sea that same night, he took with him, and presented her to her sister in requital of the night's joyance, which, as he parted from her on the morrow, he prayed her might not be the last, as it was the first, fruit of their love, at the same time enjoining her to send the guilty lady away that she might not bring reproach upon him, nor he be compelled to deal rigorously with her again. Released the same morning, and told that Ninette had been cast into the sea, Falks and Hugues, fully believing that so it was, came home, thinking how they should console their ladies for the death of their sister. But though Madeleine was at great pains to conceal Ninette, Falks, nevertheless, to his no small amazement, discovered that she was there, which at once excited his suspicion, for he knew that the Duke had been enamored of Madeleine, and he asked how it was that Ninette was there. Madeleine made up a long story by way of explanation, to which his sagacity gave little credit, and in the end, after long parley, he constrained her to tell the truth. Whereupon, overcome with grief and transported with rage, he drew his sword, and, deaf to her appeals for mercy, slew her. Then, fearing the vengeful justice of the Duke, he left the dead body in the room, and hied him to Ninette, and with a counterfeit gladsome mien said to her, "Go we without delay whither thy sister has appointed that I escort thee, that thou fall not again into the hands of the Duke." Ninette believed him, and being fain to go for very fear, she forewent further leave-taking of her sister, more particularly as it was now night, and set out with Falks, who took with him such little money as he could lay his hands upon. And so they made their way to the coast, where they got aboard a bark, but none ever knew where their voyage ended. Madeleine's dead body being discovered next day, certain evil-disposed folk, that bore a grudge to Hugues, forthwith apprised the Duke of the fact, which brought the Duke for much he loved Madeleine in hot haste to the house, where he arrested Hugues and his lady, who as yet knew nothing of the departure of Falks and Ninette, and extorted from them a confession that they and Falks were jointly answerable for Madeleine's death. For which cause, being justly apprehensive of death, they with great address corrupted the guards that had charge of them, giving them a sum of money which they kept concealed in their house against occasions of need. And together with the guards fled with all speed, leaving all that they possessed behind them, and took ship by night for Rhodes, where, being arrived, they lived in great poverty and misery no long time. Such then was the issue, to which Rastagnan, by his foolish love, and Ninette by her wrath brought themselves and others.